New details are being revealed about the cause of South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham's death over the weekend.
That's right. Emergency medical teams were called to Graham's home in Washington after a sudden illness. Preliminary findings from a medical examiner suggest Graham may have died from aortic dissection, a tear in the aorta related to the hardening of the arteries. Now, Graham's long service is being remembered by President Trump and by Graham's colleagues on both sides of the aisle.
I just can't believe it. He was like a member of the family to me. It's very tough, actually.
I think we're all trying to wrap our heads around this giant loss. He was one of those figures that was really larger than life.
While former President Biden praised Graham, saying they could still work together even if they disagreed.
Joining us now to talk about Senator Lindsey Graham's legacy and what his death means for Congress is Politico senior Congress reporter Meredith Lee Hill. Thank you for being with us this morning. We really appreciate it. We want to dive in here. Tributes pouring in, obviously, for the late senator. Can you talk a little bit about how he's being remembered this morning?
One of the things about the Senator Graham here on Capitol Hill, obviously he was a really driving force in a lot of key talks. And he's been a key force in Republican politics for decades now in his seat, both in the Senate and in the House. But in particular, even going forward, he leaves a vacuum in ongoing negotiations around the biggest issues on Capitol Hill, talking about Republicans' agenda ahead of the midterms, the war in Iran, so many topics that he would talk with President Trump about, try to serve as kind of a translator between the White House and the Senate GOP, and even Hill Democrats at times. So there's a huge loss on Capitol Hill this morning with his sudden death.
Absolutely. Those tributes pouring in, but also Republicans starting to strategize already. So talk about that part a bit, what Republicans are thinking as far as his replacement. I know the lieutenant governor's name has been floating around in South Carolina. What do you see happening next politically?
We're going to see really these talks ramp up over the next 48 hours, Republicans think. Both President Trump and South Carolina Governor McMaster have big decisions to make, and whether they will coordinate or not is a key issue here. The governor will have to appoint someone in order to serve out this short term of the remainder of the senator's term, and that he basically can decide whether he picks someone who can be a short-term kind of caretaker role and allow a special election eventually, that person to run in special election, or if he wants to if they want to clear the field for one of their allies, basically, and install someone. So it'll be really important to see whether who they pick in the next few days. We'll hear from the governor probably in the coming hours about who he wants to see in the appointment, and then depending on who that is, that'll set off an already huge jockeying over this special election for a full term in the Senate seat. Already we're seeing lots of House Republicans interested, as well as Republicans across South Carolina. So it's going to be a big race.
I know House Republicans, though, they kind of don't want to throw off the balance in the House as well. So there's a lot of implications here. I want to go back to something you said at the beginning. He had just unique access to President Trump, which I found fascinating, because if you go back to 2016, when he made a run for president, he bashed President Trump. Right. Then they kind of developed this friendship with one another. Was he simply an ally, or did he genuinely help shape the president's decision? And what kind of hole does this now leave?
Yeah, I think Lindsey Graham, obviously very early in those days of 2016, recognized that he could still have immense influence talking with the president, shaping things from Capitol Hill. And he basically decided to, become an even stronger ally, work with the president on a lot of these things. I think he was able to shape, we see his influence kind of fingerprints across a lot of the president's decisions. They obviously didn't agree on everything, as the president has even said in the last few days, but they did talk about policy and the biggest issues on Capitol Hill and in the country. And the senator really tried to steer the president towards what he thought was good for the Republican Party in the frame of Graham's bigger views about being more of an internationalist sometimes than the president, looking at alliances abroad, trying to keep those strong while also, working within the realm of the president's coalition and MAGA. And it was really important to the senator to kind of shape these things carefully in order to have the biggest influence and keep these talks going with the president.
Absolutely. All right. And we continue to watch those tributes pour in after that loss, and also, of course, what happens next for Washington. So, Meredith, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.